Okay, so this is week 1, part 3. We're starting where we left off at the end of part 2. We'll begin with Erikson's psychosocial development and Piaget's cognitive development for the 2-year-old. And we'll continue to talk about safety for the 2-year-old. More specifically, we'll talk about the car seat recommendations, and then we'll move on and talk about the preschooler, which is from 3 to 5 years of age. We'll begin with growth and development, and then discuss Piaget's cognitive development, Erikson's psychosocial development, and end with nutrition. And then we'll move on and talk about the school-age child, growth and development, and Piaget and Erikson's psychosocial development, and then end with nutrition for the school-age child. All right, so in our first slide, we'll begin with Erikson's psychosocial development. Now remember, toddlerhood is from 12 to 24 months of age. Okay, now according to Erikson, the developmental task for toddlers to achieve then is a sense of autonomy versus shame. So you have to kind of remember, toddlers are always on the go. They're, into everything. They're reaching for objects, and they're encountering all kinds of barriers along the way. And also, parents need to meet their toilet training needs. So they need to allow safe independence, and they also need to learn how to handle the temper tantrums appropriately. So toddlers then are beginning to develop self-control and willpower, and they are beginning to exert that willpower. So they are aware of their will and the control that they have over others. And at the same time, they're dealing with the conflict of autonomy. So because they are developing the self-control and willpower, and they're becoming more independent, and they're also at the same time exerting their will, they are very curious and very active also. So some of the challenges that occur are when they struggle for autonomy, and parents are not really ready to let go and allow them to be independent. So when they're exerting their will, that independence then can cause tension between them and their parent. So then if they are submissive to their parents, then there's going to be less tension. There'll be less power struggles. And when there's less power struggle and when there's less tension, then there's a more harmonious relationship between the parent and child. And the toddler really learns that when they exert their will, there's usually some kind of negative consequence. All right, so in contrast to a toddler's autonomy, their autonomy can be repressed. And if their autonomy is repressed because their parents are not allowing them the independence, the toddler will develop a sense of doubt about their ability to control their actions. So now they have a sense of doubt coupled with a sense of shame when they revolt and they fear that they won't be able to manage their own environment. So you've heard about negativism in some earlier slides. So for the toddler in their quest for autonomy, they attempt once again to exert their will, and they often act with negativism. So again, that just means they respond to requests with negative responses. So they'll say no, You tell them, you don't want them to do something, or can you please go get something for me? They'll respond no. Or you want to help them and they'll say, me do. So this is common during this time. Also, during this time, they express their emotions very strongly, and it's not uncommon where they would have rapid mood swings. So this is normal. And if they're going to have a temper tantrum, they can quickly have one. So when parents have to respond to the negativism, it's really difficult dealing with it, with that kind of behavior. So remember in our earlier slides, how do you approach negativism? Well, you want to give them options. Give them two options. Don't give them too many options. Give them two options. Either you tell them it's time for a nap and they say no. You don't want to tell them it's time for a nap. You want to say, okay, after we finish playing with this, reading this book, or when this TV show ends, then it's time to take a nap. That's one way of dealing with negativism. So as far as discipline and limit setting goes, it's really important that parents are consistent with their discipline, and they're also consistent with setting limits. That's very important. So, a child will learn when you're inconsistent, that they can get pretty much what they want, because you're always letting them get away with what they want. So limits, consistent discipline and setting limits is really important. Setting limits teaches a child acceptable and unacceptable behaviors, and that's really important. It also provides guidelines that help them know how to control their actions. So it teaches them, no, it's not acceptable for you, to get angry and throw something every time you don't get your way, or when you don't want your parents to tell you to stop doing what you're doing. All right, so now we're going to move on, and we're going to talk about Piaget's cognitive development. So according to Piaget, 12 to 24 months consists of the last two stages of the sensory motor stage. There is stage 5, which is 13 to 18 months, and during this time there is increased experimentation, there's increased curiosity, and increased exploration. So 13 to 18 months, these toddlers are very active, they're more mobile, so and they're very curious. So also during this time they're beginning to rationalize and reason. They're just beginning to do this. There's also an increased awareness of causal relationships, as an experience is lived. So as they're actually experiencing something, they're becoming aware of causal relationships. Oh, okay, I do this, and this is what happens usually. So another example of the causal relationship would be when they turn on the light switch, and as the light goes on, they're aware of that relationship. They do the flick the light, slip, the light goes on. However, that relationship is cannot transfer that knowledge to new situations. So you have to remember that. They might remember that right then and there, but they can't transfer it to new situations yet. They're still too young. All right, so some typical behaviors are, well, there's increased curiosity, so they're into everything. They use all of their senses for exploration, not unlike, when they're, you know, young infants. They can tolerate separation from parents a little bit longer than previously. They're able to insert objects into a hole, and they can put objects into and take out of the containers. Okay, so now we have stage 6. There's mental combinations, and that's 19 to 24 months. So during this time, there's an increased awareness of object permanence. So they still are not able to find an object that has been displaced and is not in their visual field, or it has been moved to another area without them seeing it being moved. However, they are aware of objects behind doors or in drawers or under tables. Imitation also has a deeper meaning and understanding for them. Before, it was much more concrete, and they were much more concrete and action oriented. For example, bye-bye was more of a behavioral response. Now it has more meaning. So dad is going to work and is leaving for the time being. So it's more of a conceptual gesture. Symbolic thought also begins, and language and symbols are used in the thought processes. They are very aware of others' actions, and they imitate those actions. So imitation also is used in their play. So when they play, they imitate a lot. And then egocentrism is present. With egocentrism, the toddler is not able to see things from others' perspectives. They cannot see another person's point of view, nor can they see any reason to do so. So some typical behaviors would be that they search for an object in several hiding places. They imitate words and sounds of animals. So if they hear a pig, they'll make a pig sound, or if they hear a cat, they make a cat sound. And they can follow directions, and they understand requests, and they can often refer to themselves by their names. And remember, again, we talked about rituals, ritualism. Rituals and routine schedules are important to the toddler. Remember, rituals provides them with the sense of security. So you got to remember that when you're caring for toddlers. All right, so now we're going to talk just a little bit about some safety. More specifically, we're going to talk about car seat recommendations. And you have this handout. This handout is posted on Blackboard, so you can pull that up. The NHTSA, or the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, along with the American Academy of Pediatrics, they have some car seat recommendations for children. And these are really the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration recommendations, and it just so happens that the American Academy of Pediatrics supports them. All right, so the recommendations are from birth. The first group is from birth to 12 months of age. So the recommendation is that a child under age 1 should always ride in rear-facing car seat. Now, there are different types of rear-facing car seats. There's infant-only seats, which can only be used rear-facing. And then there are convertible and all-in-one car seats. And these usually have higher height and weight limits for rear-facing positions that allow the parent to keep their child rear-facing for longer periods of time. All right, so now we're going to move on, and we will be talking about car seat recommendations for 1 to 3 year olds. So you want to keep the child in rear facing as long as possible from the ages of 1 to 3. The child should remain in a rear facing car seat until he or she reaches the top height or weight limit allowed by the car seat's manufacturer. Okay, so you have a range, but it's also based on their height and their weight, based on the car seat manufacturer. Now, once the child outgrows a rear-facing seat, he or she is ready to travel in a forward-facing seat with the harness and tether, which leads us to 4 to 7 years old. So a 4 to 7 year old can now sit in a forward-facing car seat with the harness and tether until, once again, he or she reaches the top height or weight limit allowed by the car seat's manufacturer. And once the child outgrows a forward-facing car seat with the harness, it's time for them to travel in a booster seat, but still in the back seat. Now this leads us to an 8 to 12 year old. So children 8 to 12 years of age sit in a booster seat until he or she is big enough to fit into a seat belt properly. So for a seat belt to fit properly, then the lap belt must lie snugly across the upper thighs and not the stomach. Well, I don't know, how often do you see that? Not very often. The shoulder belt should lie snugly across the shoulder and chest and not across the neck or the face. So you have to remember that the child should still ride in the back seat because it's safer back there. And now older children should always wear seat belts. Something that's important to remember is role modeling is extremely important. So parents should always wear their seat belts, and you have to remember that, remind parents that actions speak louder than their words. So if parents are always saying, put your seatbelt on, but then they don't do it, that's not very good role modeling. All right. Okay, so now we're gonna move on, and we'll just review some safety devices. So because toddlers are curious and they're very active, safety is really important. So there are many different safety devices, and in this slide there's a lot of little pictures. So for example, there are different cabinet latches. This is a cabinet latch. There's shock guards to cover the electrical outlets. There's 2 types. Here's one. Here's another one. Oh, actually, here's one, a shock guard, and these are shock guards to cover your outlets. And this, I'm not sure what that one is. Let's see. I'm not sure what that one is. All right. All right, so now we're going to move on, and we're going to talk about growth and development for the preschooler, which is 3 to 5 years of age. Okay, so physical growth. So for the preschooler, or 3 to 5 years of age, their physical growth is steady, but it slows down. So their average weight gain is about 4 to 6 pounds per year, and you should know this. They gain about 3 inches per year in height. And their body proportions, they lose that pot belly. That's a toddler. The toddler has a pot belly, but now they're slender and they're more agile. Another thing to remember for preschoolers is during this time, they have more control of their bodily systems, so they should be potty trained by now. They can now experience brief and prolonged periods of separation from their parents, and they're able to interact more cooperatively with other children and adults. And they also have an increased attention span, and their memory prepares them for school. All right, so now as far as fine motor and gross motor development goes, their motor development really during this time really consists of strengthening and refinement of their skills. So they should be walking, running, climbing, and that should all be well established by 36 months of age. So for gross motor for a 3-year-old, they should be able to ride a tricycle. They should be able to jump off the bottom of steps. They should be able to walk upstairs using alternate feet. But going downstairs, they may use both feet on the steps. This is good to know, this information. Fine motor development for a 3-year-old, they can build a tower of 9 to 6 cubes. They can copy a circle. They can imitate a cross as well as a vertical and horizontal lines. And they can also name what has been drawn. All right, so you're going to see some differences between from 1 year to the next. So now we're going to talk about 4-year-olds. 4-year-olds, you can expect to skip. They should be able to hop on one foot. They should be able to catch a ball fairly well, and they can throw a ball overhead. They can also walk downstairs using alternate feet. So the difference between a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old is a 3-year-old, they can walk upstairs using alternate feet, but going downstairs, they may use both feet on a step. Now, a 4-year-old can walk downstairs using alternate feet. All right, so fine motor development. A 4-year-old, you can expect to use scissors to cut out pictures, and not, adult scissors. They need to be kid scissors when they're not pointy. They should be able to lay shoes, but they're not able to tie a bow. They can copy a square. They can trace a cross, and they can draw a three-part stick figure. Now we're moving on and talking about a 5-year-old for gross motor. You would expect a 5-year-old to be able to jump. They should be able to skip on alternate feet. They can jump. They should be able to jump rope if they've been exposed to it, of course. They are now. You can expect a 5-year-old to be able to begin to skate and swim. That's probably something you should know too. They should be able to tie shoelaces. They can use scissors and simple tools. They can also balance with alternate feet with their eyes closed, and they can throw and catch a ball. Fine motor development for a 5-year-old, then they can copy a circle, they can imitate a cross and vertical and horizontal lines, they can tie shoelaces, they can use scissors and pencils, and they can print few letters or words, and they should be able to print the first name. That's a 5-year-old. Well, you can't get in, I guess, kindergarten unless you can do some of these things. All right, language then. All right, so you want to make sure that you should review your Wong health promotion of preschooler preschooler and family growth and development section for gross motor, fine motor, function, language, socialization, and cognitive for the ages of 3, 4, and 5 years of age. So make sure you review that. All right, so language. So both cognitive ability and the environment, as well as consistent role models, influence vocabulary, speech, and comprehension. So, so it's important that parents read to their children, and have educational toys, and sit down and spend some quality time with them, with those toys. All right, so 3-year-olds vocabulary should be about, they should have about 900 word vocabulary. They should be able to form sentences with 3 to 4 words. A 3-year-old, they like to talk even though no one is listening. They can just talk, and who cares if no one's listening. A 4 to 5-year-old, they can use longer sentences with more words to convey their meaning. They have a larger vocabulary. So 4-year-olds can form sentences from 4 to 5 words. They also have a larger vocabulary of 1,500 words. They question more. They can name one or more colors. They like to tell exaggerated stories, and they know simple songs. And they may even use profanity, especially if they hear it in their family, in their environment. A 5-year-old then has a larger vocabulary of approximately 2,100 words, and they can say sentences of 6 to 8 words, and they can tell the difference between, what a penny, a dime, and a nickel is. So, and tell the difference between coins. They can name 4 or more colors, and they can describe drawings and pictures, and they know names of weeks and months. Okay, socialization for a 3-year-old. They have a 3-year-old now has a higher attention span. They can dress themselves with little help except for buttons in the back. Now, of course, that's going to depend on if the parent, allows them to do that. Some parents, just dress them themselves, which they really need to be. Parents need to be encouraged to let their child, start dressing themselves in, easy clothes. A 3-year-old can feed themselves independently. They can prepare simple meals like cold cereal. They can help set the table. They're also beginning the ability to view concepts from another perspective. They're just beginning to be less egocentric. They're more independent, and but they can also be selfish and impatient. Now remember, preschoolers enjoy associative play. So associative play is they play in groups, and in those groups they play the same activities, and there's no rules with those activities. So remember, toddlers have parallel play. They play side by side. Preschoolers do associative play, where they play in groups and they do the same activities without any rules. So preschoolers are also very imaginative, and they like to imitate. They like a lot of dramatic play. They like to dress up. They like housekeeping. They like toys. They like dolls. They like trains, trucks, and medical kits. You name it, they like it. All right, socialization for a 4-year-old. 4-year-olds are extremely independent. They are also selfish and impatient. They can be verbally, physically aggressive, and they can be very moody. But anything that they do, whether it's if they draw something, whether it's a scribble, or if they make something, they take pride in those their accomplishments. Whatever it is that they do, they take pride in those accomplishments. They like entertaining, and they like to show off. Now, 4-year-olds, they have many fears. So they can be fearful of a lot of things. Remember, they have associative play, so they play in groups with similar activities and no rules. it's not uncommon for them to have imaginary playmates. So don't scold them if they do. Also, you can expect 4-year-olds, if they're playing doctors and nurses, they'll have, this is where you'll see some sexual exploration. They're very curious, so you don't want to condemn them for that. You don't want to, make them feel bad for it. That's normal during this time. Now, 5-year-olds are much more cooperative, they're less rebellious, they're more independent, they're responsible, they're trustworthy, they're less fearful, and they like to please others. And now they can follow the rules, which is good because if they're going to be going to kindergarten, they need to follow those rules. They're able to dress themselves, hopefully, and they're able to care for their personal hygiene with limited help. And again, 5-year-olds are engaged in associative play. So cognitive or cognition, for a 3-year-old, this is preconceptual phase. 3-year-olds are still egocentric, so they have egocentric thought and behaviors. So remember, this means that their egocentrism is their inability to see a situation from another person's point of view. So you got to remember that. They're just starting to understand time. They can use time-oriented expressions, and they can talk about present, past, and future. They also have improved concept of space. They're beginning the ability to view concepts. They're just beginning. They still have that egocentric thought and behavior, but they're just kind of just starting to have the ability to view concepts from another perspective, but not, it's very primitive. 4-year-olds, they're in the intuitive thought phase. That's where they can understand causality when related to an event that just happened. A 4-year-old, you would expect them to be less egocentric. They're more socially aware. When limits are set, they obey those limits generally. 5-year-olds, they're beginning to question their parents when compared with others. So maybe their friend has a toy or can stay up late and watch TV. They'll say, well, my so and so Carlos can do that. So 5-year-old, they're less egocentric, and they're more able to view others' viewpoints. That's kind of where you're going to see it more. Less egocentrism at an older age. All right, so now we're going to move on and talk about Piaget's theory of cognitive development. But we'll talk about pre-operational phase, 2 to 7 years of age, preconceptual phase, 2 to 4, and intuitive thought phase. So, according to Piaget, the main transition during both of these phases is a shift from egocentric thought to more awareness and the ability to consider other viewpoint. Although egocentric behaviors are still present, preschoolers are able to think and verbalize their mental processes without having to act out their thinking. So their thinking is also described as magical thinking. So this is important to remember. During this time, the preschooler, they believe that their thoughts can make things happen. So they may feel guilty and responsible for bad thoughts that may have coincided with a wished event. So essentially, during this time, they believe in the power of their thought and they accept their meaning literally. So if they think or wish something bad and something bad happens, they feel responsible and guilty. So it's really important that that parents you know, tell them, or you know, family members tell them if they did think something bad to happen and something does happen. It's important that family members, you know, tell them that, you know, no, you know, you did not cause, you know, something bad to happen. It just happened. So you have to remember that they're unable to logically reason the cause and effect of illness or an injury. It makes it difficult for them to understand because they're still concrete thinkers. All right, so now we're going to move on and talk about Erickson's psychosocial development in the preschooler. So with Erickson's psychosocial development for the preschooler is really developing a sense of initiative. So according to Erickson, the main psychosocial task for a preschooler is that they are developing a sense of initiative. They are also during this time, they're very active. They're very energetic. So everything they do it to the fullest, and they have a sense of accomplishment and satisfaction in all of their activities. So when they're playing, when they're just, you know, living in the everyday world, they have satisfaction in anything that they do. So conflict can arise when they overstep the limits of their ability and inquiry and experience a sense of guilt for not acting or behaving appropriately. So feelings of fear, guilt, and anxiety may result from thoughts that differ from expected behavior. So for example, here we go. They may wish something harmful toward a parent, and then something does happen to the parent. So then the child then feels overwhelmed with feelings of guilt. So once again, it's very important to clarify that wishes or thoughts cannot make things happen. And this, by doing that, by clarifying that, this will help them overcome their guilt and anxiety. And sometimes you might have to, you know, do a lot of talking to them and reassuring them. All right, so now we're going to talk about some nutritional requirements. The nutritional requirements are really the same as for toddlers. You want to, of course, avoid fruit juices because they really have no nutritional value. You want to have parents avoid fast foods, foods high in fat, and junk foods. So we really want to encourage parents to feed their children a well-balanced diet with portion control. And also you want to remind the parents that the quality of the food is more important than how much they eat. So well-balanced diet is important. So parents need to look at really nutrition on a weekly basis as opposed to on a daily basis or per meal basis. Children this age may only want a specific food for a few days. Now, as long as the child has a balanced diet each week, they will have adequate nutrition. So for nutrition, the rule of thumb is 1 tablespoon of food per year of age. So parents should not use food as a reward and should not force a child to eat. All right, so now we're going to talk about fluoride. Fluoride is necessary to prevent dental caries. So you want to use fluoride if it is not in your tap water, or if the child drinks bottled water that doesn't have fluoride. So I always would recommend that they should consult with their pediatrician or the dentist. Physical growth then, for a school-age child. Now we're moving on to the school-age child. So the physical growth then, for school-age child, which is from 6 years to 12 years of age. So during this age group, the children are in more control. They're more graceful, they're steady on their feet, they're slimmer in the trunk, and and they have longer legs, and they have a lower center of gravity. And the changes in their body proportion make it easier for them to perform physical activities. So their height, on average, they grow about 2 inches per year. You should know that. As far as their weight goes, they gain about 4.5 to 6 pounds per year. And in pre-adolescence, that begins from middle childhood and ends at the end of the age of 13 years old. And prepubescence is the 2 year period precedes puberty. So it's 2 years before puberty. That and that's called and that occurs during pre-adolescence. So prepubescence is the two years before puberty occurs. All right. So puberty then, that signals the beginning where they develop secondary sex characteristics. It's important to remember that there are huge variations when secondary sex characteristics begin. So puberty begins on average for girls at the age of 12 years of age, and puberty begins on average for boys at 14 years of age. All right, so now we're going to talk about Erikson's psychosocial development. Erikson's psychosocial development for the school-age child, there's a stage of industry versus inferiority. And this is pretty much a stage of accomplishment. So the goal is to achieve a sense of competence in their personal, interpersonal relationships by acquiring social skills and technological skills. Well, we all know that most kids in school age, don't have a problem with those technological skills. They may now, because they're so adept at the technological skills, they may not have those social skills. But anyway, so the school age children, they want to develop new interests. They want to try new things. They're more involved in activities, and they have new interests, and they're venturing out from the family. They're meeting new people, and they're more independent. So of course that's going to depend on culture, so you have to remember that. They take pride in their accomplishments. So if they're in sports, they take pride in that. Any school activities or anything that they do at home, they really take pride in those accomplishments. And if they're not able to accomplish what is expected, then they develop a sense of inferiority. All right, so now we're going to we're still on we're on cognitive Piaget's cognitive development. There's a concrete operational stage of development. In this stage, children are able to use their thought processes to experience events and actions. They don't have to experience it in order to they can think it. They're progressing from making judgments based on what they see, that's perceptual, to making judgments based on reasoning, conceptual. So they have a better understanding of cause and effect. So the major task is that they learn that physical things don't have the capability of appearing and disappearing by magic. So they're mastering the concept of conservation. So there's conservation of liquids, there's conservation of mass, there's conservation of numbers, and there's conservation of length. So we'll talk about each one of those. So for conservation of liquids, for example, um, a 5 to 7 year old child can be presented with two identical glasses filled with the same level of liquid. And the contents of one glass is poured into a different shape of glass. You would expect a 5 to 7 year old child to recognize that each glass contains the same amount of liquid. All right? So again, conservation of liquid. You start out with two identical glasses filled to the same level and have equal amounts of liquids. The contents of one glass is poured into a different shape of glass. You would expect a 5 to 7 year old child to recognize that each glass still contains the same amount of liquid. All right? Then you have conservation of mass. A 5 to 7 year old would be presented with two identical balls of Play-Doh that are equal in mass and equal in weight. One ball is flattened into a pancake shape. You would expect a 5 to 7 year old to be able to recognize that each object contains the same amount of dough, so nothing's changed. All right, so now we have conservation of numbers. So a 5 to 7 year old is presented with 2 rows of marbles. Each row has the same number of marbles and they're equally aligned. Then the same number of marbles are repositioned so it looks like one line is longer. You would expect a 5 to 7 year old to recognize that each row still contains the same number of marbles. They've just been repositioned and realigned. Then we have conservation of length. You would expect a 6 to 7 year old when presented with two pencils of equal length that are aligned so they are in equal length, and one pencil is moved to a different position and no longer aligned with the other, you would expect the 6-year-old to be able to recognize that the pencils are still of equal length. Okay, so those are some concepts in Piaget's cognitive development. All right, so now we're going to end with nutrition for the school-age child. So parents really can provide opportunities for children to learn to like a variety of nutritious foods by exposing them to different types of foods, as well as setting good examples. So this is a time when healthy and unhealthy dietary habits can become ingrained. So a healthy and well-balanced diet is really necessary for normal growth and to prevent obesity. And we all know that obesity has increased over the past 2 decades, excuse me. It's important that parents and healthcare providers and educators encourage physical activity and provide healthy and well-balanced diets. So children this age should be encouraged to be involved in planning, shopping for and preparing nutritious foods. I mean, that's how they learn good eating habits. They should have 3 nutritious meals and 2 healthy snacks a day. So of course we know that there are outside influences. At school they're exposed to, or even at other people's houses, they're exposed to non-nutritious foods. They're exposed to junk food, sodas, and also kids are eating more fast foods and their parents are buying it for them. So also sedentary lifestyle. Children, a lot of children are less physically active. They're watching TV, they're playing video games, and just sitting around texting. So we really want to encourage more physical activity. And obesity, we mentioned obesity. There's, there's easy access to high caloric foods, high fat foods, and kids are less active. So we really need to encourage more activity and eating more of a well-balanced diet, less, less junk food, less foods high in fat. That's the end of week 1, part 3.